Hello, everyone. Welcome to this introductory radcast on the topic of problem number one, abrupt climate change. And I'm happy to be joined here by my colleague and co-host, Michael. Michael, how you doing there?
I'm doing well. I'm glad to be here and looking forward to having a conversation on what we consider to be the number one problem.
Awesome. So, and why do we call this problem number one? The reason is very simple. If we do not solve this problem of abrupt climate change, which is leading us directly on a fast track towards near-term human extinction, like in the next few years, less than 10 years on the rate we're going, all of the other problems we have are completely irrelevant. You know, from gay rights to North Korea to ocean acidification, you name it. If we do not solve the problem of abrupt climate change, forget about everything else, because we're going down really fast and we'll be extinct. So everything else is irrelevant. So in this brief introduction, what I'd like to do is just let's just start to brainstorm a little bit here and talk about the kinds of topics that we're going to be covering over the course of this conversation, which is focused on the problem of abrupt climate change, not so much on the solutions. That's other conversations will be focusing on the solutions. But the problem of abrupt climate change, we'll be talking about such topics as CO2 emissions, methane emitting from the melting permafrost around the poles. We'll be talking about the contamination, pollution, and acidification of the ocean and how its ability to absorb carbon is greatly diminished. We'll be talking about rainforests and other ecosystems, which traditionally have been these wonderful carbon sinks that have been absorbing carbon, but are being clear-cut and slashed and burned at an accelerating rate, which is destroying the Earth's ability to naturally buffer abrupt climate change. We are currently at a point where last time I checked, CO2 was at over 400 parts per million. And whereas the threshold that the scientists warned us we cannot cross is 350. So we're already well past that threshold in terms of CO2. But I would say equally importantly, we have the problem of methane, which has been, concentrations of methane have been growing at an exponential rate. And we're now at a CO2 equivalent. These are the key words, CO2 equivalent of over 200 parts per million CO2 equivalent of methane. Now, methane is currently at about 2, not 200, but 2 parts per million. But molecule per molecule, methane is about 100 times as potent a greenhouse gas as CO2. That's why we're back of the envelope multiplying the 2 parts per million times 100 to get CO2 equivalent of 200 parts per million CO2 equivalent. So add those two up, and we're at over 600 parts per million CO2 equivalent, just from 2 greenhouse gases, not to mention all the other greenhouse gases. So the situation is truly dire.
Well, as you delve into the details of abrupt and global climate change, I'm reminded of Guy McPherson, the conservation biologist. I wouldn't even call it a metaphor of society as an engine that, so long as it's turned on and revved up, that the outputs are quite predictable, right? As predictable as, say, a combustion engine, so that what we're dealing with here, yes, it's science, it's scientific, but it's also political, it's also social. There's so many different dimensions of climate change, which is why we go back to things like don't even think about it, right? These kinds of ways of saying we don't get it. We're not getting with the program, and no response is essentially the same in this context as essentially destroying, right? If we say we're not going to search for regenerative solutions, what we're saying is we're going to continuing ramping up production and pollution, et cetera, et cetera. And what we're dealing with here is a crisis that is now upon the precipice of a full-blown catastrophe, simply because we're not looking for another engine or motor, right? We're not willing to not only turn it off, but to back it off. And I think that's where conversations have the most merit. It takes these kinds of conversations to be able to act.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up Professor Guy McPherson, with whom there is a whole series right here on howtochangetheworld.org called The Guy Fawkes and Jamin Show, where we delve into a lot of these questions. And
I'm a big fan myself.
Thank you. Thank you. So we'll continue to look at this from multiple different angles. Right now, we just kind of want to give an introduction to the topic. We'll provide some links to some Guy McPherson presentations, etc. And really, I just want to leave it with one thought, and that is, there's a lot of disinformation out there about, oh, climate change is a hoax. It's really not that bad. We've really got decades to figure this out, and so then, let's chill out on all the alarmist stuff because there really isn't consensus among the scientific community. That's all a bunch of wishful thinking at best and deliberate lies at worst. We are in an absolute crisis right now, and we need all hands on deck, and we need to solve this problem. But part of the solving the problem is understanding the problem and taking it seriously. So that's really what this particular series will be focused on. Problem number one: abrupt climate change. So welcome to the series. I'll give you the last words, Michael. Any final thoughts?
Let's get the conversation going.
Let's do it. All right. So we'll see you all on the conversation. Everyone, welcome to join in. All right. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much, and thank you, Michael. See you soon.